And so let me begin by just saying that it's great to have this, the role of the university being explored in building the future workforce. And considering how universities and business and government can really come together to meet our future needs. That's the key, I think, and doing it together. So those of you who know, the university really has put at the heart of its mission to serve our regions. And to serve our regions, provide a skilled workforce, but there's also the innovation aspect that goes with it. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And to think about, there is a real challenge that is right upon us now. We have a large industrial workforce here in the Hunter, more than 16,000 workers employed in the energy and resources sector, 46,000 indirectly, and we've already heard about some of the largest changes afoot. In Muswellbrook, BHP announced that it'll be shutting its Mount Arthur coal mine after failing to find a buyer. So it's going to close in 2030, several thousand jobs to go. The power stations, Liddell in 2023, Bayswater 2030, and Eraring in 2025. And we know there's thousands of jobs associated with those closures. And so these departures of major employers is, I guess, coupled with broader moves to decarbonise our economy. And we've heard the new Labor government will be moving to setting a decarbonisation target. But we think this actually provides an opportunity. It will be a large structural adjustment challenge in our nation, and it's happening now. So a lot of people talk about, well, what's going to happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years? But for us, I think we're going to be talking about the next 5 years because it's right upon us. And so we really do need to get ready and look forward to thinking about how we can work together. So I think our university is well positioned. I heard the previous discussion. I got in the tail end of that panel. There's some good talking about skills that are required and how people can work in the universities or the TAFEs, and that we see it very much a seamless type of training opportunity. And we've all read probably the data that 9 jobs out of 10 in the future are going to be created requiring either TAFE or university qualifications. Very little work for unskilled. So people have got to make a choice. And I think, as Jessica was said, maybe do one and then do another. We think it should be even blended. You could start doing an apprenticeship and then transition through to a degree, and if you feel that's the right thing. And likewise, our students who are doing a degree should be able to take some TAFE subjects with some practical skills attached to them. We're negotiating those arrangements as we speak today. So that's the sort of thing we see, very much a blending. So whether we're doing retraining or upskilling workers for new jobs, or even doing this blended work opportunities, we should be thinking about the future industries. So the new energy opportunities such as hydrogen, medtech is definitely a place. I noticed that Ampcontrol is a sponsor of today's session. They're looking to diversify into areas such as medical technology. And there will also be other areas we don't know about. And means we've got to be thinking about being nimble and agile to jump onto new opportunities. So how will we identify what skills will be needed, and how do we know which skills we need in the workforce? So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. And so this is not a challenge that's been faced, just in Australia uniquely. Many countries have faced these sort of challenges, and we've been looking at how other economies have been travelling along, sort of mid-sized economies, and some great examples of education innovation here in Australia. But particularly, I'd like to pick, just for today, 3 countries: Germany, Korea, and Israel. Now, the World Economic Forum has ranked Germany as the most innovative country in the world. I know people knew that, but does anyone know who the 3 largest exporters by value over $1 trillion in the world are? You'd probably say China, right? The US, but the other third country is Germany. Yet it's only got a population of 82 million. So it really is performing at the level of countries with 8 times the population. And so innovation has been the key primary driver of their economy. They've embedded innovation through the industrial system, so their industry is continually looking how to get a competitive edge, how can they improve their products and services. But also, as part of that, they've got a very strong blending between higher education and the industry sector. So if you study at a German university, they're very applied science universities, and you must complete at least one semester at a company. You can't graduate without working with industry. Or likewise, having a totally integrated study. So you work and study, and you take some extra years to do that. We used to do that in Australia 30, 40 years ago, but they do it now. And so for us, we've just said, that's a great idea. So we are very much in the process of having all of our students at the undergraduate level have a significant work integrated learning experience. So you won't be able to, from 2024, you won't be able to graduate from the University of Newcastle with undergraduate degree without work integrated learning with industry. Now when we say industry, it could be broad, it's business, could be government, could be not-for-profit, but nevertheless, it's actually getting people ready for those skills. So having real-world experience will reinforce the skills learned in the classroom, which will be invaluable for our students. So that's one example. Now, I could talk more about Germany, but I'll just use that bit. Another example, Korea. The Korean economy was devastated after the 1950s war, and it's now the 10th largest country in the world by GDP. It's home to 15 of the world's 500 largest companies, including companies like Samsung and Hyundai. And this is an incredible industrial transformation for a country which literally was agricultural, had nothing, absolutely nothing, and in 60 years. So it's been largely driven by investment in education. They now have a skilled workforce and has become a leader in manufacturing and advanced technologies. So we looked at what their needs are, and they're very much aligned to what I believe their interests are for us here. For example, they sent a delegation to Australia to discuss hydrogen and how could they be an importer of Australian hydrogen. Green metals, critical materials, all very necessary for their own industries. And Korea is Australia's fourth largest trading partner, and so we have a real opportunity to leverage these risks. These links, not risks. These links, and again, we're trying to align with these opportunities. So I've joined the Australia-Korean Business Council, and we're looking how to bring the industries closer together, as well as also aligning our education opportunities around innovation. The third example I referred to is Israel. Israel is another very successful innovation country. So you think of the NASDAQ, one of the largest stock exchanges in the world, and the companies that are listed there. So the most populous origin of companies on the US stock exchange is the US. The second highest, you'd say, if you guessed, would be China, of course, and it was, and I think it's been waning, but right behind them is Israel. Israel's got a population of 9 million, and you're comparing the countries like with populations of 1.4 billion, 330 million, it's incredible. And it's really built on a strong record of research, translation, and technology development. There are more high-tech startups per capita than anywhere else in the world, and second only to the US in venture capital funds. So a great place to draw inspiration from. Their universities aren't much better than ours, but it's a mindset that separates them. I've been there several times in the last 20 years. In fact, there's a delegation next month, and I'm pleased to see my colleague Zee Upton, she'll be going to that trade delegation led by the Israeli Chamber of Commerce. And I think it's a real opportunity to think about how to bring government, industry and universities very much hand in glove. It's a club. And when you think about what we have here in the Hunter, why couldn't we do that here? And we already are starting to look at some of these priorities, but the priorities have got to be aligned, and you've got to think about what they are. For us, I see things such as agriculture, technology, defence or medical innovation. They're areas we could actually learn from the Israelis how to move those areas along. They're all very strong in those areas. So I think Israel is a gold standard of what can be achieved by a small country. And we're a reasonable sized region, and also in a smallish country. We're much bigger than Israel, but I think the opportunities are here, just as much here. And I think we can learn from those. That's just 3 examples, just to give a bit of inspiration or understand where the university is looking to. So we're not going to try to do something different, and we're going to be a fast follower where it's been proven the model works. And I think it's probably time for me to wrap up and hand over to our panel. And I'd like to introduce my colleague, Professor Mark Hoffman. Mark's the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University, responsible for academic activities, including all our education programs. So he's ideally placed to talk about the future skills and give us an oversight over that. He'll lead the panel. He's got a strong background personally in materials science, and previously served as the Dean of Engineering at University of New South Wales. He's a Fellow of the Board of the Australian Academy of Engineering and Technology, and for his sins chairs the New South Wales Cladding Safety Review Panel. But I'll hand over to Mark, who'll introduce the panel, and we'll crack on. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much, Alex. We're going to have Stuttgart, Posan, Tel Aviv, and now in the future it's going to be Newcastle added to that list. And my colleague Zee Upton won't have to travel over to Israel; she get to stay right here in Newcastle. So I would like to call up the panel, and as they're coming up, I'll give them an introduction to keep things rolling. I think there should be a slide up there to start with. Panel, please come on up. I think it's just. You'll see there's a Slido code. Those of you who haven't used Slido, this is going to be testing the basic digital skills of the business community in Newcastle on the Hunter. What you need to do is pull out your phone, go to slido.com and put in that code, and it'll all come up. And all the students can do this very well. And then what will happen is put in your questions as you go. You'll get a chance to vote up questions. So what that means is when we get to the end, we'll start with the questions which most people were interested in, and which hopefully let us put aside a good bit of time for Q&A. So in terms of my panel, thank you very much for coming up. We're starting in no particular order. We have Professor Craig Wheeler. Craig Wheeler. Craig's currently acting Deputy Head of College of Engineering, Science and Environment. He's also an Associate Director of Tundra Bulk Solids and a Professor of Mechanical Engineering. And he worked for 10 years at BHP Billiton before joining the university. Professor Zee Upton, at the end there, is Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research and Innovation at the university. She's actually a biochemist by training and has a significant research record in skin, wounds and tissue repair. And prior to joining the university, she spent 6 years in Singapore, where she was Executive Director of the Skin Research Institute of Singapore, following a number of other significant roles in Singapore. Boris Novak, I'm sure is known to many of you. He's the industry advisor for HunterNet, an industry development and advocacy network for SMEs across the Hunter, and he's also chair of New H2, the Hunter's Hydrogen Technology Cluster. And he works to attract new businesses and support existing businesses in the region. Darren Layden, thank you, is Managing Director of Whiteley Corporation. Whiteley are an Australian-owned company based in the Hunter, and they're a global leader in developing and manufacturing novel infection prevention products. And finally here, we have Elizabeth Carpiel. Elizabeth is Chief Executive Officer of Blue Zone Group. Blue Zone develops innovative subsea equipment and services in oceanographic, defence, energy and water utility sectors. And she was Project Manager for the Sea Urchin Marine Power Generator Project in partnership with Element Energy Technologies. So we have a great panel here. And what we really were going to try and look at is where we need to go in skills. We all know there is a significant skill shortage, particularly in the Hunter, and it's really significant. Interestingly, we also have 6% of the population who could work who doesn't work. Now, the university is a primary educator of professionals and those who need university education, roles that need university education in the Hunter. And Alex talked about the importance of tertiary education moving forward. The other advantage of Newcastle within the Hunter is it's very connected into the community compared to many other universities, particularly around Australia. And so it effectively becomes the provider of skills for the region. And that means that it should be very community responsive. Now, however, education tends to be a long-term proposition. It's not something you can turn the tap off really on and off in a matter of weeks. You can provide a course for a particular small skill set, but the core of providing a tertiary education isn't something that can be turned off really quickly. However, we do have a real urgency here. And what we know is that the success of our region is going to be built on people and the education of those people. So whatever we have as challenges, it's something that we really need to address. Now, the university, as Alex mentioned, is trying in part to address this flexibility by expecting all of our students to have work placements. And there's a really interesting statistic in the Australian Skills Commission. 75% of employers won't even consider an applicant who hasn't got work experience. So I think in itself, that identifies the real significant importance for employers to have someone who knows what's involved at the workplace. And if we're going to get this quick transition, if we can deal with that part during education, it actually speeds up addressing this whole skill shortage process. And that's one of the core issues behind it. But before we get into sort of some of the ways that we can actually address this challenge and the roles of the university sector in responding to industry growth, I'd like to call on the panel, particularly the members that come from industry. What skills will be needed for the emerging industries of the future? And I might start with you, Darren.
Thanks, Mark. Pretty obvious in the medtech sector what we're going to need. We have a pretty heavy STEM type focus, which I'm sure you've heard throughout today. I think it's wonderful to hear the words engagement and connection being used throughout today, right through. But in the healthcare sector, we're going to need obviously things like medicine, doctors, nurses, allied health, and all of those things supporting medtech. But it really comes back down to having the right people in STEM. Science, technology, engineering, maths are basically the building blocks for a lot of medtech. So those are the skills really that we're going to need in the future and continue to need.
Thanks very much. I might pass now to Elizabeth. You're at the front end of a lot of this, right in the innovation space.
Yes. Yeah, so I think what's challenging, what we can see coming, is the amount of data we're collecting with our sensors. So you can send out, what was manually done, someone throwing something over the side of a boat and trawling it through the water to collect data. And they could make decisions as they were going to go over that way, change direction, pack it up if the weather wasn't good. So they could, and they were formulating the question, changing it on the fly. When you set an autonomous vehicle out, how do you give it that information to design the questions and the method of collection so that you're getting the right data and you're not getting useless data? And then when you get that data back, how do you trawl through it to get the answers that you're seeking to ask the next lot of questions?
Thanks very much. And Boris, you spend a lot of time talking to employers. What do you see as the real skills needs as we look forward?
There's probably quite a lot to that. Try and unpack some of that. First of all, we need our existing skills that we've got, probably just a lot more of them in terms of scale and volume. Everyone's really struggling at the moment to find candidates just in their own existing fields and vocations at the moment. But in terms of the future, we're seeing really the big giant awakening is all around environment and sustainability. So a lot in that intersection between environment and construction, how we can make better sustainable buildings and all the infrastructure and utilities that goes into that. We hear a lot about advanced manufacturing, and there seems to be a tendency for people to reduce or simplify their understanding of that to a picture of a factory of robots. But at the end of the day, it's actually around understanding how to apply those robots in the most efficient and optimal manner. So a lot of it gets down to a lot of fiddly sort of unsavoury sort of investment in, I say unsavoury because it's just painful, fiddly, messy systemisation, really. And that's the thing that will give us our competitive edge, because the difference between a machine shop and a machine shop across the road that's competing in a global sense is that whole systemisation. How all that those fiddly processes, culture, management, strategy all come together to make sense. Darren mentioned data, and I think Liz also mentioned data. We're probably seeing the embryo, we're still sort of experiencing embryonic stages of sort of that exploration in terms of data science and data analysis here in the region. I think that'll increase. A lot of it's just still being achieved elsewhere, but I think we'll see more, as we see more of an influx of people into the region from metro areas, we'll see probably more of that actual, I guess, cerebral capital actually being done here, because it's a sort of thing that doesn't have to necessarily be done locally, but I think we'll see more of that. We talk about hydrogen and skills in hydrogen. The reality is that we'll probably see much of the same skills of what we already exist here, but probably a resurgence. For example, gas fittings and plumbing will still do. We'll see all the traditional skills just again, just still going forward. Welding, boiler making, plumbing, electricians, particularly if we see industries like offshore wind take effect. It's absolutely huge and a game changer for the region, really, and will allow us to actually execute on our ability to actually get to a sustainable future as well. So
No, great. Thanks. No, that's really good, and thank you to the three of you, because I'm now going to pass across to two members of the panel that come from the university sector, and the question I'm going to ask them is, what do you believe that the university can be doing or is doing to address some of those issues that were raised by the other three panellists? I'll start with C.
Yeah. Okay, can I also add in a couple of comments about the first question? I'd just like to point out, I agree with every comment that was made, but to attract people to the region, you also have to think about the needs for the care economy. And so maybe we didn't mention it because it's largely women who are in it, but you're not going to have people here if you can't actually have people caring for people. The second comment I'd like to make is that the other thing that's really important, if we need more engineers and we need more STEM trained people, is we actually have to have great role models of women in those fields so that we actually lift the productivity, because it's been well recognised the only way we're going to lift productivity in the region is having more women in these higher paid technical roles. So that's just my 2 bobs worth for there. And what was the actual question again? Sorry.
I just want to add something to Z's last point. I've been looking at statistics across the state, and the University of Newcastle has the smallest number of female applicants into its engineering programs of any engineering program in the state. So that's actually a cultural thing. It's just the decision to make this application comes from families, it comes from parents, it comes from the school system. And that's something I just wanted to put that in there, because I think it's very relevant to what Z was just saying. Now the question was from having heard the sort of some statements around skills needs, what do you see as the role of the university? What is it doing, what it could do to address some of those?
So I'll answer this from a research and innovation perspective, given that's my role within the university. And I think one of the things we can do is actually start listening to industry and training people who also listen to industry so that we can respond to the challenges that they face and come up with solutions. So training in entrepreneurship, critical thinking, innovation, even things like, you don't actually have to be employed by industry, you can create your own business. So I think that's something that we are contributing to. And I think the other thing that's really important at the Callaghan campus in particular, we're working very closely to try and have co-location of industry with students, with opportunities for research and innovation. I think actually these ecosystems, which is why I'm going to Israel, I'm going to compare what it was like to Singapore, which Singapore did really, really great co-location and joint labs and those types of things. So I'm hoping that we can actually create an ecosystem there. But not just on the Callaghan campus. I went to Muswellbrook recently, had a fantastic day there. They've got the real challenges in the future, so we've actually got to help lift and shift that community as well. And we have a role there working with the advanced manufacturing space, with TAFE, with the council so that they can actually do the evolution, which is the word they like to use, to new economies and new industries. And again, it involves all of the disciplines. And then the last thing I'll say about it is, if we can train people who can work between disciplines and with other disciplines and in teams, that's actually how we're going to make step change, because the days of, innovating in your own sort of, biomedical sciences discipline is over. You actually have to work with engineers, you have to work with mathematicians, you have to be able to work across a whole range of different disciplines to make step change.
Thanks, C. Craig.
Yeah, look, thanks, Mark. I guess the problem with going last, a lot of it's already been said. But look, I think one of the important points that was brought up was the skills shortage, and it's probably a fairly well-known fact. I think Australia only trains basically 1 in 3 of the engineers we actually need here in Australia. So there's that huge skills shortage in that particular area. And I guess how we address that, it really comes back to that education ecosystem, and it's not just working with our graduates when they arrive at our door at the university. It's working with the high school students, even the primary school students, and getting them engaged in the areas of STEM, the science and engineering subjects. And the university has done a really good job of doing that over the last few decades through the Science and Engineering Challenge program, where we move into schools and we run activities throughout the day, and then the students compete against their classmates for those activities. And what we're trying to do there is, once they are involved with those activities, then align those to the programs that they can study at university. So if they like doing an electrical circuit, for example, we let them know that that's potentially a preemptive interest for electrical engineering, control systems, mechatronics and the like. So it's bridging that gap between the students, also informing their teachers as well through those activities, that helps those students moving to those STEM activities where we need them. I think once we get them to university, I think what we then need to do is work with industry, and we're doing that at the moment. We're developing our advanced manufacturing workshops and prototyping workshops at the university over the next period of 4 years. So we're closely involving our industry partners in terms of what activities and what type of machinery we need to expose our students to in those advanced prototyping workshops. And really, I see the ecosystem starting almost in primary school, transitioning through university, and then after that, moving into postgraduates. And that's where we need to work with our industry partners through the Engage PhD programs that we're also setting up. So working with our industry partners, knowing, yes, we have good quality graduates coming through, but also embedding those graduates in their industry for undertaking further training and further skills. So I think it's the whole ecosystem from primary school right through to postgraduate qualifications.
Thanks very much. That's a really nice segue into the next question I'd like the panel to consider. And what examples or tools or mechanisms can we really work on so the business community and the university sector can work much closer together? And think in particular of something you may have seen somewhere else or something you've seen in our region which is working really well. And I might kick off with you this time, Boris.
Thanks, Mark. Probably the best way to answer this is something that HunterNet's been trying to do with the university, and I think we're starting to get somewhere in trying to set up what we'd call a continuum in terms of a person's career and career life cycle. At the moment, we have a group training company called Career Connections, and it is about vocational training for trades and trainees in business, and 25% of the people that we take on in that actually are university dropouts. So they've tried uni and said, this is not for me, we'll go down this other road. What we want though is to try and set up that continuum so that people that complete their trainees or apprentices that yearn for furthering into tertiary education can do that in a more seamless fashion. So how Alex framed this whole session at the start in terms of that work integrated learning for all, which goes beyond just STEM as well. And I think that's extremely important because particularly for business in the Hunter, we tend to be, because we have that sort of engineering pedigree, we tend to be sort of self-serving in the sense of if we are going to invest in, for example, undergrads, we tend to look at the engineering and STEM sort of side of it. But there's a lot more that we can probably do in looking at those skills or other education outside of that. For example, communications degree for how can we get them on in terms of, as an undergrad, to assist our business in changing the narrative and discourse for certain industries or whatever. I mean, we've seen coal has become a dirty word. Perhaps we could have people looking at communications degree and helping, you know, the rhetoric all around that. And, you know, we're hearing terms in terms of, for example, just transition. That's all communications. And even in particularly, Z talked about the care industry, you know, the whole social sciences side of things. But at the moment, it's really hard to achieve that continuum because the system's quite, there's a fundamental line between vocational training in the sense that the individual gets quite a lot of help in terms of government help to get their education and the placement into industry. Whereas if you're going down the road of a more tertiary sort of qualification, the risk is on the individual. So how do you achieve that mixed environment where you've got apprentices and trainees that are getting paid to work, and you've got the individual who's generally risking their own sort of pay and also funding that education to do that. So we need to help the individual looking at that as well, so we don't get that resentment and dropout in that regard if they're looking to pursue that. And in that regard, it helps set the tone that we're all different in what we want to pursue. It's not one's better or the other's worse. We're just choosing that. So in terms of the mindset that Alex was talking about, it really comes down to a cultural individual measure of our own self-worth. You know, is it about the dollars we earn, or is it our ability to pursue what we actually want to do in life?
Thanks very much. I'm going to get you to pass the microphone to Craig to give his thoughts on this. I'd just the rest of our panellists, we really short answer to this because we've got lots of questions coming in, and I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions as well.
Look, thanks, Mark. I think one of the key opportunities there, and I know not every student that comes through, would make a good engineer at the end of the day for various reasons. But I think there's some real quality skill sets that we see that come through that can potentially work with the university through a micro-credential style of teaching. And part of that advanced prototyping workshop and advanced manufacturing workshops that we're setting up is having that ability to train people coming in for a micro-credential around a particular area of that manufacturing. So I think that will really work quite well in that scene. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Darren.
I've probably got a little bit of industry feedback rather than anything else. Look, I think the university needs to make it easier for industry to do business with the university and to do research. I met Alex a number of years ago in his office. I'm not quite sure he enjoyed my visit at the time. My feedback at the time was that, look, in some aspects my dealings with Newcastle University was with the Business Prevention Unit, which meant that we really didn't do too much with the University of Newcastle at all. I'm very pleased to report in the following years that that's changed significantly, and that things have really changed a lot at Newcastle University. But I would say from an industry standpoint, you need to make it easy to do business and basically for us to connect and engage together. So industry and the university, things like IP, things doing collaborative research and some of those things, it needs to be easier for industry because in the past it hasn't been.
Now, right next to you, you've got the person who's going to change all that.
I'm on to it. Okay, that's all I have to say. Look, we realise that we do need to have a single omni front door is what we really need, so that no matter whether you're in the inside looking out or the outside looking in, that you can actually know that how do you get there, and people respond. And I can tell you we're shortlisting, interviewing the director of Key this week, so we're really moving on it.
Happy to help on the panel.
Potentially, yes, actually, because we did have a panel member drop out, so we might talk later. But I also think that by having opportunities like the recent Trailblazer that we got with the University of New South Wales, which is a over $200 million cash investment in clean energy and recycling. And the University of Newcastle's role is very much in the higher TRLs or technology readiness levels to actually help get things translated and commercialised. And I think that's going to be an absolute shot in the arm for the region. We've got to do a lot in 4 years. We're excited and we're looking forward to working with you.
Thank you. And Elizabeth, you get the final say on that one.
Well, I've been mulling over Z's comment about gender in STEM. So I did my undergraduate at the University of Newcastle in the late 90s, and there was very few of our students, and it's a little bit disappointing to see there's still a few female students. But one of the things I do think the university does well, there is a third-year engineering course in project management that brings industry partners in to be tutors. So I've been doing that for 6 years. And when it started, the course coordinator actually went out trying to have all female tutors to give exposure to the female students. And some of us have stuck it out for 6 years. It is a time commitment, but it's also lots of fun. And I think that's a great program that the university has.
And I think there are many students and maybe people here who are thankful for you sticking with it, Elizabeth, so thank you. We've now got we've got 10 questions, and I'm looking at our organiser here who's feeling that maybe 10 questions probably won't be all addressed in time. But the number one upvoted question, it came in when we were saying what skills, and I'd like to pass this in the first instance to Darren. In a previous panel, curiosity and problem solving was key to skills of the future. How is the curriculum addressing the needs of this skill by industry? So I'm going to ask you to particularly say, is that really a skill that's needed on top of all of the other ones that we mentioned? And then I'll get Craig to say how it's being addressed.
So curiosity and
Problem solving.
problem solving. Look, one of the great things about being educated in higher education and basically doing university courses is you do learn how to problem solve. So unfortunately, probably for the crowd, I'm very STEM focused. I did chemistry at University of Newcastle. And problem solving as part of science, engineering, and pretty much most degrees, etc., is part and parcel. One of the great things about a higher degree is you learn how to think and you learn how to problem solve. And I think that's pretty much core to no matter what. I do want to say that we're not just STEM focused in our company. I have two wonderful colleagues. One is our CFO and the other is very talented in marketing that came with me, and they're both ladies, of course. We do, when you're in manufacturing, it's not just about STEM. There is basically a multitude of skills, and I don't mean by any way to say that university is the pinnacle, Boris, because we definitely need a skilled workforce across the board with trades, with absolutely everything. So because I'm just talking about the University of Newcastle, that's where I'm focused, but we certainly need talented and skilled workers right across the board, and we need them engaged. So I think that the number one thing is engagement, and people that can basically problem solve and think. And I've also got some things about gender, but I'll leave those as well, which are very positive and that are happening in the Hunter as well. And I believe Scott Sleep spoke about some of those things earlier on.
Craig, what's being done?
Thanks, Mark. Look, I think problem solving is the key to all of our engineering degrees, to be quite honest. What we try to do is embed a design and build competition or a project throughout the entire program that engages the students. We obviously have to teach the students the fundamental sciences and the mathematics, etc., computing, but at the end of the day, it's those design and build projects that really engage the students throughout their 4-year program. I run a design and build competition in second year, which is a national competition run by Engineers Australia, where we give the teams a competition or a task to do. They need to go away, design and build, problem solve that particular task, and then come up after 12 weeks and actually have a little device that does something on a track, and then they compete nationally and then internationally in that competition. So I think the problem solving is the key, particularly from the engineering and science perspective, and it really does take the fundamental sciences, as I said earlier, and really puts it into practice. So, and it also engages the students. That's what they want to do. They love that problem solving, those challenges.
Thanks very much. Now I'm going to move on to the next question. Everyone has agreed where things need to go. I'm sensing a general agreement here. However, what's being done and implemented to change and align the mindset of current decision makers? So here we're talking about some policy questions. And I might kick off with you, Elizabeth. What have you seen that's addressing this?
Don't go later.
Okay. I know Boris has got many views on this.
All right, I'll stick my neck out.
And you got
I think...
1 minute, Boris.
Yeah, okay. So with the vocational training, there's a lot of government assistance there, where the other tertiary education, with getting involved with industry, it's largely on the individual to take that risk. So perhaps some policy around co-partnering between government and industry to help transfer some of that risk from the individual, because I know industry wants to sort of take the risk in investing in the individual, but they're not necessarily sure how to go about that, so some policy around that.
Okay. Z, do you have some thoughts on this? Government policy that would help us improve skills and link universities?
What I will say is that I'm refreshed by what seems to be some thinking around this, that there's bigger and bolder programs being offered at state level and also at federal level, and I think that's needed. Before it seemed to be lots of little bit of chicken feed being thrown out to everybody to do little projects, whereas I think the focus on advanced manufacturing in specific sectors, because the pandemic really drove home how reliant we were on imports and the fact that we weren't making anything anymore. So I'm actually quite pleased with what's been happening, and we just have to make sure that just because we're in are we regional, are we urban? I'm getting very confused by the signals I'm hearing, but I will remind the government that this is the largest economic region in all of Australia, and they need the hunter to survive, so they need to make sure they're investing in the survival of the hunter as well. So if they keep doing these big, bold programs, I think so long as we're positioning ourselves and got the skill sets that we need, I think we can do very well.
Thank you. And finally, Elizabeth.
Okay.
Had time to think?
I've had time to think. I knew Boris had a great answer because he shared it with me earlier. And he is right. We have a Career Connections trainee and an apprentice with us right now, and that's very different to how we employ our engineers. So there isn't a similar program. In our sort of narrow defence field, we are quite supported by the defence industry. So we have an Office for Defence Industry Support that does offer funding. So they've just sort of gone through a rebranding and a changing, but they do offer funding, and that helps us to continue skilling our employees, and that's important as well.
Great, thank you.
Mark,
Now,
can I just
please
quickly jump in there, if that's all right? Just some quick stats on manufacturing, and I hope you don't mind. I'm going to quote Professor Roy Green from about 2 weeks ago. The 50s and 60s, we had manufacturing contributing approximately 24-25% to GDP. By the year 2000, that had shrunk to 12%. Currently sitting at 6%. That manufacturing's contributing to GDP. So there's been a lot of talk from government about supporting manufacturing, but there hasn't been a lot of action. So we'll be quite pleased to see that turn around.
thank you very much. I think from the room. Now, we've got one question here, which I'm going to get an answer from everyone. And the question is, what is the credential that every person in this room should have? And I'll wait 10 seconds for a volunteer. I teach, and so if you don't get the volunteer, you pick someone. Who wants to kick off?
I'll give it a shot, but it's not a credential. Sorry, I don't mind talking. I would say engagement rather than a credential, so I think it's an attribute.
See?
I would support that, but I'd say having the skill of being able to listen. Because often if you go into a conversation and you're overlaying your own opinion on what you're hearing, you don't actually hear what the other people want. So if you're going to engage, you must know how to listen.
Great.
Look, I think innovation, maybe it's coming from the engineer in me, but I think having that innovative aptitude, I think that's, I think it's a great skill to have, to be honest. Yeah, so innovation.
Thank you. Boris?
All those three. Just being able to ask why. I think it's a big one.
And Elizabeth, you got the last opportunity. This is a tough one.
I think an important skill is being able to teach, so some sort of mentoring and coaching ability, because lots of people have lots of deep knowledge and are experts, but they're not always capable of sharing that with people. So that, that's where universities are important, but even in the workplace where, you've got this inherent commercial knowledge that you've built up over 20 years, how do you ensure the longevity of that and transferring it through the team?
Great. We've had a really interesting discussion here. We started off with what are the skill gaps and what we do need, and we went through the digital and a few other areas. And then we finished off with a great question: what's the credential that everybody needs? And it was much more around engagement and the soft skills. So I think that's actually a really nice circle that we went from the panel. And I'd just like everyone to join their hands and thank the panel for a great discussion.